Hello, hello. Welcome into the PHNX Cardinals podcast presented to you by the DraftKings Sportsbook app, America's top-rated sportsbook. Like and subscribe. Leave us a 5-star wherever you get your podcast. I'm Johnny Venerable. Pleasured to join by Howard Balzer of GoPHNX.com, NFL Hall of Fame voter, longtime Cardinal reporter. Howard, Bo and I left the Combine, and it was such a grind that he immediately had to jet set to Florida with his family. So, thankfully, we were able to top our guy, official beat reporter for PHNX Cardinals, Howard Balzer, on today's show. And man, oh man, I feel like the last two Combines, Howard, so much news specific to this franchise, right?
No question. No question. And a lot of stuff that didn't have to do with the Combine, obviously. Yes. with last year, of course, when the news dropped, I think it was on Monday of Combine week, with Kyler Murray's agent, putting out his all capital letters manifesto of why the Cardinals should sign Kyler Murray now. And then, of course, the Cardinals' response, in essence, to that was a couple days later, signing Cliff Kingsbury and Steve Keim to not only contract extensions, but contract extensions through 2028. And here we are a year later, and they're both not with the organization anymore. We have a total redo, rebuild, whatever you want to call it, going on. And then, of course, this year at the Combine, amidst everything going on, we had the NFLPA dropping its survey, all 32, which, needless to say, was hardly flattering to the Cardinals, coming in 31st out of 32 teams. So I'm sure the Cardinals are hoping that next year at this time, when Indianapolis rolls around, that there'll be a lot more positive things to talk about.
You brought up the extensions to Kyler and Cliff last year, and I have to tell a quick story. We were out late, I think it was Tuesday night, in Indianapolis, and it was myself and Bo and producer Shane was with us as well. And somebody came up to me, he put his arm around me. He said, "Hey, where are my Cardinal people at?" And it's this guy, good-looking guy in a blue sweatshirt. I'm like, "Who is this?" And he was incredibly friendly, having a good time. It was Eric Burkhart, the agent for Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury. He reps, if you can believe it, presumed top 10 pick Tyree Wilson. So it'd be interesting to see how those negotiations would go if Tyree is eventually an Arizona Cardinal. So I had to tell that story. Eric is a fan of the show. We appreciate you, Eric. We appreciate all 88 of you who are here live today. Like this video, shared around the YouTube algorithm. And listen, let's get into cut and dry. This roster overhaul that I think we anticipated was coming is happening. Today, we got word, Howard, that Robbie Anderson, the easiest cut in the NFL, was released or is released. That's going to save them $12 million against the cap. And then also Rodney Hudson presumably is going to be cut. Now, I had it sourced last summer that he was basically retired, wanted to retire, and the Cardinals kind of courted him to come out because they didn't have a contingency plan. And then you think about, Howard, with Rodney, the fact that the Raiders, he was trying to get the Raiders to release him so he could go play in like Kansas City. So Keim had to intervene. They traded for him with multiple thirds. That trade ended up being 2 years and about a handful of games played, a little more than that, but you get my point. I mean, that the Rodney Hudson saga, I put it out on Twitter today, it perfectly encapsulates Keim's era. It's like, yeah, we can't develop linemen. We don't prioritize in the draft. Let's just go throw picks and money at Rodney Hudson. Hopefully it works out. And, you've had a great staff for a long time that when he played, the Cardinals were very viable, but he just didn't play enough.
That's exactly the case. And last year, at least he played 12 games, which was the bulk of the season. And the Cardinals were 9-3 in those games that he played. And then this year, like he said, I mean, I had talked to some Raiders people when all the injuries were going on with Hudson, early in the season, and he wasn't in the lineup. And I said, what was it that led to him being traded and wanting out or whatever it was at that point? And they said, well, it was mostly money, but it was also because here was a guy that had been threatening retirement for a couple of years, had knee issues ongoing that he obviously couldn't shake this year. And, the Cardinals were hoping, I'm sure, hey, we can get 2 years out of him. That's a pretty good plus. Obviously, that didn't work out. And like you said, the key was there was no contingency plan. But it always seemed, as was chronicled during this past season, it almost seemed like every move the Cardinals made, even though it looked good at the time, didn't work out for other reasons. And that was certainly the case at the center position, because the Cardinals were primed to select Tyler Linderbaum in the first round as the contingency plan for Hudson if he decided not to play, if he did decide to play and then there were injury issues, they had their guy for the next decade. Well, then, of course, word comes privately at the time of the draft that DeAndre Hopkins was about to be suspended. And so now the Cardinals are looking at a situation, wow, we're not going to have Hopkins for 6 games. So they pull the trigger on the Hollywood Brown deal, which negated getting Linderbaum. And so here we are now, almost a year later, and wondering who's the next center for this team going to be. But, it's interesting you mentioned Hudson wanting to be released to go to the Chiefs. Well, look what the Chiefs did. I mean, they drafted who? Creed Humphrey.
Yeah.
And here's another guy. I think he was a 2nd-round pick, if I'm not mistaken.
He was.
Yeah,
he was.
I mean, this guy came in right away, started right away, and he's probably their center for the next decade. So that's just one of the many holes that the Cardinals have to worry about this offseason. It's just a matter of when Hudson goes off the roster, whether it's I had thought all along that this was probably going to be a post June 1st situation, but part of his contract, which they lowered his base salary, which I learned, is that there's a $1 million roster bonus that is due to be paid on March 19th, which means if he's on the roster on the 5th day of the league year, then the Cardinals have to pay him $1 million. Can't imagine him doing that. And really, if you look at the cap ramifications of it, it's not that much different if he's on, if he was cut or retired before June 1st, obviously before March 19th, or if they waited till after June 1st, because the thing people forget that if you wait until after June 1st, all of the money is still counting against the cap until the player is gone after June 1st. So there's not that much of a difference. If they would, cut the cord quickly, I would assume it would come before the 19th, because some would say, well, it'll be a nice going away present. Well, he really got the going away present this past season.
He did. He played the Cardinals.
Yeah, for only playing 4 games.
Yeah, he didn't. Who knows if he's going to play next year or not? He was done last year. He got some fat checks from the Cardinals. They put themselves in that position, and I think Keim's getting demolished in the chat, rightfully so. He just didn't do a good enough job. But here's something I would take solace in if you're a Cardinal fan, and try to bear with me as I get through this point, because the consensus I got from being around folks in Indianapolis, I wouldn't get too hung up on cap space with this team this year. This could very well be a year in which they've got some cap that goes unspent. I don't know that definitively, but it's not so much cap space as it is opportunities for new people, specifically draft picks, young players to come in and try to win a job. Because this roster, and Howard, I'm assuming you're going to attest with this as well, it's not a bunch of players signing free agency away from contending. They're going to fill holes. They'll probably go out and sign a center on a 1 or 2 year contract, because they can't go into the draft thinking, well, we have to force a pick at center at pick 34. I love John Michael Schmitz. He's fantastic. What if he goes 28th, right? What do you do then? You got to have a contingency plan in place. But, I got to ask this a lot today after that report came out, like, how much are they going to save? I'm not a capologist, but I know, definitively, this team's not going to be in the market for a Javon Hargraves. They're not going to go out and spend $15, $20, $21 million on singular players. They're going to go out and be crafty and cautious, look for guys that have a familiarity, certainly with Drew Petzing and Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rallis, of course, because they were together in Philadelphia, that they can fill out the meat of this roster while also recouping, because nobody in free agency, and this is where Keim struggled, nobody this month is going to hamper a draft pick's development. That was always the issue with Keim and Vance Joseph and Cliff Kingsbury, where they'd sign players and then they draft players, and then it was just this came the fall. There was no singular plan. If they go out and they sign a center to a 2-year contract and they draft John Michael Schmitz, it'll be an open competition, and they want John Michael Schmitz to win that job, right? And a fourth round pick could be out of free agent. That was never the case. We've got Tanner Vallejo starting over Isaiah Simmons. Like, that's unacceptable. That can't happen. You've got the 8th overall pick. So that, to me, is where things are going to change. They want to come out of this draft with 12 picks plus. This roster needs a bunch of infusion of young talent. So they can afford any player they want, but I think they're going to be very specific, and rightfully so, who they choose, Howard, to bring into this locker room, because Robbie Anderson had some stuff he was dealing with. They willingly brought him on as kind of like a last resort. And then Rodney Hudson, I don't think that sets a good example. Like, he was a great person, a great human being, immense experience and knowledge. But, like, Cardinals need to be paying players that are available and that, go to bat for. He's the opposite, really, of somebody like Jason Kelce, who literally you'd have to pull him from the field to get him not to play. And Cardinals need players like that.
Yeah, no question. And it's interesting you mentioned Kelce, because the other center that the Cardinals wanted in the draft last year after not getting Linderbaum in round 1 was Cam Jurgens. And then the Eagles drafted Jurgens, I think it was 4 spots in front of the Cardinals to be the heir apparent to Jason Kelce. But I think you run on with a lot of it. I mean, if there's a guy coming out of his first contract that is worth some money that you have a real confidence is going to be around for 4 or 5 years, then I can see doing that. And while I think it would be a great addition for this team for a guy like Hargrave, I mean, he's 30 years old. And so how many years are you going to get out of him? Now, if you can get 2 years, a 2-year deal for reasonable, well, bring him in there, because he's a good character guy and a good player. But you're right. I think a big part of this, it's almost going to be like the coaching staff, I would think. This roster will, because I think they want to be at least younger on the roster with players than they are with coaches. And they've gone very young with the coaching staff. And you're right. I think they'll do that and try to pick up as many draft choices as they can, which is really going to make the next month and a half intriguing, wondering if they're going to keep that 3rd overall pick. And I know we're going to get to that later in the show, keep that pick, or just get as many picks as you can that are going to help this roster get better.
Yeah, no one wants to see this team lose if they're going to lose in September and October with old players. I mean, it was the biggest problem I had. Like, the end of the year, Cam Thomas and Majay Sanders not getting playing time over some of these veterans. It just didn't make sense. But one of the players that we expect to be moved, the show has been on this since mid-January, DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, the buzz in Indy was not, will he get moved? It's how quickly is this going to happen? Then we've got a new report from Mike Silver, Howard, basically saying, like, Monty Ossenfort has been making phone calls, taking phone calls for the last couple of days. And, I assume that's been happening for some time. Goodness, if you get a look at, no disrespect, the free agent receiving core, it's not great. Now, Michael Thomas could be released, Keenan Allen could be released, but Hopkins is clearly, above all, the most impactful singular player, assuming that he can rebound after a couple down years. But, I mean, Howard, we've got a graphic here from producer Emma. There are some teams that I know definitively are in the mix, and then there are some teams that make sense. But, we had Benjamin Albright come on this show this time last week and say it's going to be Kansas City. We had some folks from PFF come on the show and say the Giants want him. Everybody from CHGO that we talked to said the Bears would redo that deal in a second for Claypool for DeAndre Hopkins. Then I heard some stuff, from a source about the Patriots. What do you make of the Hopkins market? And do you think the Cardinals should settle for a 2nd round pick, or much of the fan base, they want a 1st?
Well, I can understand a fan base wanting a 1st. And I was responding to a few people on Twitter today, and they're saying, well, how can you not get a 1st for DeAndre Hopkins when you gave up a 1st for Marquise Brown? And they referred to Hopkins as being in his prime. Well, let's remember, it was 3 years ago when he was even more in his prime. I would argue he's not really in his prime now, especially coming off 2 years of injury and going to turn 31 in June. And he has a big contract. Whoever's going to take on that contract, and people have to understand a lot of times that when trades are made, a lot of times the draft compensation isn't as good as you'd like it to be because of the player's contract. And Hopkins is due $19.5 million this year, and then a big number next year. So you have to think, well, what team is going to want to take that on and hope that he is as closer to his prime than not, going to be 31 and coming off those injuries. So I think that so bottom line though is, let's remember 3 years ago, Hopkins' contract was the big issue in terms of him leaving Houston, and the Cardinals didn't give a number 1 pick then. So it's interesting to me that people wonder, well, why can't they get a number 1 for him when they didn't even have to give a number 1 for him when he was 3 years younger 3 years ago?
Yeah. And I think that's the sticking point for some people. Here's what I will say. It's a seller's market if you've got a D-Hop, because this draft class has got some guys, but they've never played it down in the NFL, and it's not comparable to last year's draft class. The Chris Olaves of the world, Garrett Wilson. There's nobody like that in this draft. Like Quentin Johnston's a magnificent player, but he was undersized. He was 2 inches shorter than everybody thought. He was 6'2" instead of 6'4", and he body catches. Like if you're Green Bay and you're going all in, if Rodgers is back, or if you're Kansas City and you're moving off Juju and you want to bring in, like, there's only one player that's going to fit this. And so I'm with you. I think, of course, everybody would like a first round pick. And you see some of these teams, Green Bay, Kansas City, the Giants, it's a late first. So that's where you're going to start the conversation if you're Monty Ossenfort. Then you're probably going to have to pivot to a second. You could get a second, maybe some change. But to me, this team, with Kyler Murray's injury, a new regime, it's the right time to sell high. And I say high, of course, knowing Hopkins is over 30, but it's the same issue. The team should have sold high on Patrick Peterson once upon a time, and they didn't. So this is forward thinking. It's going to be difficult, Howard, to watch DeAndre Hopkins play well for somebody else next year. It's going to be difficult the day he gets traded to come on this show and talk about it, because really, you look back, Cardinals only got 3 years and about 2 seasons worth of play from Hopkins and 1 postseason berth. So you could make an argument like, at the end of the day, could you call it a success? I think it was, but just because they gave up a second, they dumped David Johnson's contract. I don't think it reached its culmination like we all would have hoped. And again, if he goes to somewhere like a Kansas City, we're all just be prepared. If he's healthy, he's going to produce for them.
No, he probably will. There's no doubt about it. And here's the thing too. When I mentioned about contracts, is that none of the money he has left on his contract, and it's about, it's $19.45 million this year, and then $14.9 million and change next year. That's pretty good money for 2 years, but none of it is guaranteed. So you know that Hopkins wants some guarantees. And so that's going to be a team that will not only be looking to give up draft choice compensation, but knowing they're probably going to have to restructure that contract and take a whole bunch of that salary this year, turn it into a signing bonus, add a year or two to it, probably voidable years where they can spread out the salary cap hit, and just hope, like you said, that at 31 in June, that they get, a couple of really good years out of him, and that he avoids injury. But, 2 knee injuries in 2 knee injuries in 2 years, 2 hamstring injuries in 2 years. And that can very well make teams a little bit wary. And, the Chiefs, a lot of times, they're not a huge, spending team. Look at this year. They didn't want to go the distance for Tyreek Hill, ended up trading him, got great draft choice compensation for him. And then they signed guys just to fill in with Patrick Mahomes. Smith-Schuster, like you said, Marquez Valdez-Scantling. And they still won the Super Bowl with those guys. So they're probably thinking, well, why do we have to pay $20 million plus or whatever it's going to be for DeAndre Hopkins, as good as he is? So all I'm saying is, I think it complicates the trade market somewhat, and it's going to be very, very interesting to see what exactly happens that for the Cardinals to get some kind of value for him. And then remember too, I know you mentioned about the cap, and it was a good point, but they will save on the cap no matter what. But if he's still on the roster, which I don't suspect he will be by a week from Wednesday when the new league year begins, he counts over $30 million against the cap. Now the Cardinals, that's on the cap, so that's within the numbers that they know that they can handle. But you still don't want that lingering, that much longer after that. And if they do trade him prior to June 1st, then it'll be $8 million. They'll still take a $22 million cap hit. So, they can live with it, like you said, and go forward, because this is long range for the. Who knows what's going to happen this season? Certainly, you don't want to be bad, but you also are trying to build this thing, and obviously get a whole lot better players around Kyler Murray on that offense. That's the big question, though. What do you do at wide receiver? They have a question with Marquise Brown, who's in the final year of his deal, at a little over $13 million, I believe it is. Do you sign him to a long-term deal? Do people think that he has earned a 4 or 5 year contract worth 19 or 20 million a year? I'm not so sure of that. So that's a position that they really have to pay a lot of attention to going forward, especially when you talk so much about surrounding Kyler Murray with the talent that can bring out his best.
Yeah, to me, the team that makes a ton of sense, and I heard it about Thursday afternoon, I got a text message. I mean, New England, to me, you're not paying Mac Jones anything yet. Your offense has been disheveled. You know, you can't develop receivers there. You've missed so many times if you're Bill Belichick in the draft. We know that Belichick and Hopkins have an admiration for each other. It's really just the Bill O'Brien piece. Can those two coexist? Because if they could, I feel like the deal might be done already. But the Giants is also a team to watch, depending on, like, can they get this Daniel Jones deal done? What do you do with Saquon? I mean, they were paying Kenny Golladay big money, and he was giving them nothing. So I'm sure they would, gladly upgrade with DeAndre Hopkins. He's going to have a market. You know, this show is on the beat when and if it happens, when it happens in the coming days. So we'll see. We're also going to see our friends at Circle K a lot because they're the newest partner. I don't know if you know this, Howard, of PHNX. PHNX Cardinals is happy to announce that Circle K is joining the PHNX family. You think about PHNX synonymous with Valley Sports, now Circle K, of course, synonymous with the elite of convenience stores. And again, it's bigger than just a gas station. It's a place you can go, feel good about, get coffee, get food, recharge your batteries, and get this. Circle K is giving away a $500 gas card to one of our Arizona listeners. All you got to do out there is text PHNX to 31310 to enter. Again, $500 gas card from our friends at Circle K to any of our listeners here at PHNX Programming. Just text PHNX to 31310 to enter. It's been a phenomenal start to the partnership. We don't go hand in hand with partners we do not use and believe in ourselves. That's Circle K. And our next partner, Mr. Howard Balzer, Four Peaks. Some of our favorite beers are on tap there this month. We've got spring training tours throughout March. It's baseball season right around the corner. Nothing better than spring training and a tall glass of your favorite Four Peaks beverage. Our friends at Four Peaks will be out at the M3F Festival March 3rd and 4th. Again, if you missed that, check it out. It's a phenomenal experience with Four Peaks. Anytime you're in the Valley, all you got to do to keep up on their events, go to fourpeaks.com/events. You can see their Beer Week entertainment. Check them out at Four Peaks in Tempe. It's a staple of the Valley. I'm sure Jonathan Gannon and his staff, they don't know already about Four Peaks. They're going to learn about it soon enough. Again, Four Peaks Brew at Four Peaks Brew on social media. I hope our guy Bo Brock is having a couple Four Peaks as he recharges his batteries, much deserved, on the sandy beaches of Florida. We are back here on the grind, that being Howard Balzer and myself. And I mean, let's talk a little NFL Combine recap. Howard, it was crazy environment. Jalen Carter not available for obvious reasons. I wrote about it on gophnx.com. I think the Cardinals have taken him off their draft board, presumably at 3, which opens up a lot of possibilities. But I've heard their preference. They want to trade down. Now, that's easier said than done. But from your vantage point, what needs to happen for that to happen? Do the Bears have to move first? Do you start making calls right now? I mean, we've got rumors that Seattle, even though they just re-signed Geno, likes Anthony Richardson. You got the Colts right behind you. How can the Cardinals leverage this 3rd overall pick, in your opinion?
That's a great question, because you almost have to have the other teams move and have someone trading into that. If they're going to do it early, they have to be confident that a guy is there that they want. I mean, we saw a couple years ago when the 49ers did it pretty early, but there was the whole debate: is it going to be Trey Lance? Is it going to be Mac Jones? And it turned out to be Trey Lance, but they knew they were in pretty good position to get that quarterback at that number 3 spot. So the big question is, what other will the team really know? And here's a part of it. See, I always believe the whole Jalen Carter thing. Certainly, a lot of teams are going to be looking closely at that. I don't know if it's going to affect his draft status that much, but I was always had the sense that the Cardinals would prefer, if they were to stay at 3, prefer a pure pass rusher as opposed to Jalen Carter. As good as Carter is, but you can get a Will Anderson there, or even Tyree Wilson. Then that might have been what they might have preferred anyway. And so now it becomes a fact. Hey, you might be, if you're willing to trade down. Well, if the quarterbacks go 1-2, then someone could come up for Anderson. And now you're probably not going to get as good a package for that as you would for a team wanting a quarterback, but you'd still get a pretty good draft package for it. So probably they're going to have to wait it out a bit. I know that, Ryan Poles, the Bears general manager, had a big talk with the media in Chicago, and he was talking about, boy, I'd love to get this done early, but you can't rush into it because you don't want to pull the trigger too early, and then perhaps there might have been a better deal out there. And you also don't know where teams stand on who do they really believe is the number one player in the draft. Is a team really willing to go up that high for Bryce Young? And that's a big question. I mean, again, the big story of the week was how, which was no surprise, he measured almost identically to Kyler Murray. And is a team going to want to take that chance with a smaller guy who's not even?
And he's not the athlete, in my opinion, that Kyler was coming out with the explosiveness. They're not on the same level.
No, so that becomes the question. Sure, the Bears would love to trade down, and he's talking about, I know I can get a number 1 in 24 and a number 1 in 25, and then some other picks this year. Well, we're not talking about Peyton Manning here. We're not talking about Andrew Luck. We're not even talking about how Trevor Lawrence was viewed coming out. So this is me. I'm not convinced that there's any quarterback that's worth giving up that much for. But we also know how teams just get so pressured and so, out of their minds to trade up for guys that they make deals that they regret later. I mean, look at the quarterbacks that have been taken in the top handful of, the top handful of picks over the last number of years. Marcus Mariota, Jameis Winston, Jared Goff, Carson Wentz. I mean, these are guys that aren't even with the teams that they were drafted by. And Carson Wentz right now doesn't even have a team. And so that's the risk you take. And I just don't think there's the value there in any of these quarterbacks. So that's going to obviously drive what the Cardinals are able to do, with that pick. But chances are they're going to have to wait.
The good news is I don't think any of these quarterbacks hurt their draft stock. And you can make an argument. Richardson certainly helped himself. He's a specimen. He's enormous. And a team can talk themselves into him being Josh Allen 2.0. CJ Stroud threw the ball exceptionally well. Will Levis helped himself. And, Bryce Young certainly didn't hurt. I don't think he hurt his stock, but there's a conversation to be had now. And I think, Howard, something happened this morning. And I tweeted about it that helped the Cardinals, I believe, and that's New Orleans getting Derek Carr. Derek Carr had been talking to Carolina and some of these other teams. And producer Emma, when you get a minute, can we see the draft order? And this is why Derek Carr helped the Cardinals. The Cardinals need to be in a position where they're in a waiting game with some of these quarterback needy teams in the top 10. Like right now on this show, everybody should be rooting for Aaron Rodgers to either stay in Green Bay or go to the Jets, because the Cardinals want to be sitting there licking their chops that Vegas needs a quarterback, Atlanta and Carolina, and not pictured Tennessee at 11, which, by the way, they look like they're gutting the roster. And we know Monty's got relationships in Tennessee. To me, it plays out like this. Everything that I heard from Benjamin Albright and some of the other people we were talking with, Howard, is Houston would like to go up to number 1. Now, maybe they can talk themselves into a Stroud, but if Houston goes to 1, that creates a problem with the Cardinals, because then it's like Chicago now holds the pieces again at number 2. And ideally, a team like Atlanta, Carolina, or Vegas would go to 1, because then definitively the top 2 picks are quarterbacks. So then it becomes, okay, Indy wants to come up to 3, give us a pick. Atlanta wants to come up to 3, give us some picks. The Cardinals are in a provocative position, I think, an advantageous position, assuming that Rodgers stays with Green Bay or the Jets, and that, even if Houston goes to 1, I still think there's a path for the Cardinals to trade down. It just becomes a little murkier. So I was talking to some people, Howard, while I was in Indianapolis, and the general consensus, don't take this to the bank, this is just what I heard, was that the Cardinals would like to talk themselves into a line of scrimmage player in a trade down scenario. The kid from Oregon, phenomenal cornerback. The kid from Illinois, close to my hometown of Bloomington, fantastic player, right? Joey Porter Jr. from Penn State, great. But what I heard was that Gannon, I know this, it's his favorite position. He loves the defensive backs, but he likes to take guys that are undervalued and make them into players. And I just don't know if the Cardinals have the appetite, with knowing the importance of the line of scrimmage and knowing that they don't have a D line to speak of, and their interior offensive line is dicey and their tackle situation's murky. I think they would like to walk away, whether it's at 3, 9, 10, 11, with a line of scrimmage impact player. Now, I could be wrong about that, but that's just the kind of sense. So, like, watch like a Paris Campbell Jr., watch Skoronski from Northwestern. Tyree Wilson, obviously, is a name to keep an eye on. And I think that's the right decision. And I don't want to, knock on cornerbacks for 45 minutes. But to me, the Cardinals are so much more than a cornerback away. They need a tone center up front on either side of the line of scrimmage. Now, if they take Christian Gonzalez and he's a Pro Bowler, that's great. Sauce Gardner last year, Patrick Surtain the year before, he could be next in line. But something tells me, after talking to 3-4 people, like they want to take an offensive or defensive lineman, I'll include pass rusher in that.
No, I think you're right on. And I also think that the wild card in all this, especially if they trade down, is where do those other picks come? Because that's where you can get some of those players. And, you mentioned Tyree Wilson, as good as he is viewed now. This draft is really deep in edges. And so you should be able to get one, even if it's not one of those top couple of guys, whether it's later in the first round, early in the second. I mean, there's so many ramifications to this. But the other thing, just to go back to the order of the round, the real wild card, first of all, if the Bears and Texans would flip spots, it wouldn't be surprising to see the Bears trade again after that.
Right, that's what I mean.
So,
they're in the driver's seat then, which is unfortunate.
Right, and that brings Indianapolis into play here, because on two levels. One, and some would say, well, if there's still a quarterback there that you like, well, you don't have to trade with the Cardinals, let's just say, depending on how the two picks go. But what Indianapolis has to be wary of is someone else behind them jumping in front of them to get who, especially if it's one of the quarterbacks. And who knows, maybe they fall in love with Richardson, maybe they fall in love with Levis. Who knows? That's a thing that we never know. We can look at all the projections and all, the Todd McShays and the Mel Kipers and all Daniel Jeremiah's, and they all do a great job. Don't get me wrong, but they don't know truly what teams are really thinking about these guys. And that's why when the draft rolls around every year, we sit there and go, oh my goodness, that's a surprise. That's a surprise. Yeah. Well, it shouldn't be a surprise, because we never really know what each individual team is thinking about these guys. But, that's what makes this, this opening part of the round just, it's always a crapshoot, Johnny, but maybe even more so this year. And especially when it comes to those quarterbacks, to see which teams really love these guys. And then we'll look at it 3 years later and they'll be going, oh my goodness, we made a mistake. But you never think you're making a mistake when you make that pick in April. Yeah.
And I think, it's going to be tough. We went from, Jalen Carter, Will Anderson or bust, right? And Hopkins is a member of the Arizona Cardinals. And now there's this reality coming into play of, well, we're not going to get Jalen or Will, and we're trading away DeAndre Hopkins. Like, what are we doing? And I get that. And that it's a tough mindset. But I think, I know, like, this team is more than just Will Anderson Jr. away from being competitive. And he would be my choice if they stick and pick at 3. Because I think he checks every box that you want this new regime to be able to say, it's our poster child for Cardinal football for the next 10 years under this regime. But by hook or by crook, I think they're staunchly committed to trading this pick if they can get something for it. Even if it's just, let's trade down a couple picks and then you give us your second this year, which is a top 50 pick. That's a starter. That's somebody that they feel like has Pro Bowl potential. I think we're going to be in a position, Howard, and I told this to Bo, I think on Friday's show, I think the Cardinals are going to end up with 3 seconds this year, which would be absolutely wild. It's unprecedented. And I also feel like Cardinal fans are scarred because this team has never prioritized drafting and developing at a high level. And I think that it's difficult. I'm going through this too. We want to play this game of sign this player in free agency, trade picks for players. That was the kind of way of doing things, and that's over. This team now wants to build a sustainable winner. Everybody does, but you do that, especially with a $50 million quarterback, through the draft. And so Maybe there's a scenario where they could trade down slightly with an Indy or somebody like that and still get Will Anderson. Everything's on the table, but it feels like, especially Howard, I don't know if you saw this or not, like Bidwell went on 98.7 and said, like, we're revamping our scouting approach, which, number one, that's great, but it's not going to be implemented until this college football season. So wouldn't it make sense then to say, well, we want 2 1s next year and we want 2 2s and whatever, get as many picks for next season as well. That, not to say you're punting on this year's draft, but it's like this rebuild, and it's a rebuild right now, is going to take more than one singular offseason.
No question about that. And that's absolutely no question about that. And I think that, you mentioned if you pick up a number 2 with a slight trade down to be top 50, might probably be top 40.
Right.
And who knows, if Hopkins ends up getting a second round pick, that would likely be later in the round. But still, like you said, that's 3 seconds. They're probably going to get a pick at the end of the 3rd round as a compensatory pick. And they've got some extra choices coming there. And then the other part of it too, let's remember, trade downs aren't limited to only the first round.
No doubt.
They're going to have the 3rd pick in the 2nd round, which is 34th overall. Mm-hmm. And who's to say that, hey, especially you in the 2nd round, there's going to be a bunch of players there that you would be probably happy with. Well, if there's some other team that just wants a certain player, you could trade down from 2 and get another 3, or who knows what it might be. So that's going to be real interesting, because the one thing about Monty Ossenfort, obviously he's going to take from all the different places he was, but the one thing he witnessed year after year in New England when he was with the Patriots was Bill Belichick, and they weren't that they haven't been that great a drafting team. I mean, that's one thing we need to get out there, but they also, Bill Belichick traded all over the place, trading here, trading there, picking up a pick next year and trading for this pick. I mean, he did that all the time, and they would end up with a bunch of extra picks. And I'm going to be real curious if that's one of the things that Ossenfort really works to try to accomplish in this draft. And like you said, that could end up, picking up some picks next year, and don't give up too many this year, but still get some extras next year, which will just continue and help that rebuild.
It's a loaded draft at a couple different positions. It's a loaded slate tonight on DraftKings. Talking to NBA, the Phoenix Suns feel like house money right now. Anytime you wager on the DraftKings Sportsbook app, you've got a ton of odds, future props, NFL free agency, whatever you want to dabble in, spring training. We've got March Madness right around the corner. No better time than to tap in with the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use promo code PHNX. Get this. New customers can bet a mere $5, get $200 in bonus bets instantly. It doesn't have to be on the spread or the money line or the over-under, whatever you want. Put a 5 spot on it if you're a new customer. Slam that promo code PHNX. Get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Only at the DraftKings Sportsbook app with promo code PHNX. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details. I don't think there's a better time of the year, even in the NFL season, to dabble on DraftKings right now. There's so much stuff going on. There's so much action to be had. Speaking of action, if your furniture is not up to snuff, if it's not up to par, take a note from us and check out our friends locally owned in the Valley at More Furniture. They do the white glove delivery service. It's phenomenal. Everything you see, the luxurious stylings of the PHNX office, the recliners, everything we use on our shows, it comes from More Furniture, and it comes at a discounted price. I was at a certain big box retailer over last weekend that supposedly is synonymous with savings with furniture. It may rhyme with Schmeikia, and it's not. Prices have gone up everywhere outside of our friends at More Furniture. Save on the best, biggest furniture in the Valley when you head to, you guessed it, morefurniture.com. Howard, so last week, the NFLPA released their, report cards, if you want to call it, and we went in on the Cardinals pretty hard. And you've got a tremendous article that I read before the show today at gophnx.com detailing the Cardinals' failing grades. But when you saw that come out, I just want to get your thoughts. Were you surprised? You're at the facility almost every day during the season. You talk with players. What was your reaction to that NFLPA report?
I was somewhat surprised that it was that bad. I mean, that's that's the thing about it. And we get a limited view of the facility. Certainly, we're not in the weight room. We when we go into the locker room for availability, we pass by the cafeteria area where everyone eats, and it looks like a pretty good setup. The locker room, you could see where, they don't even have enough locker space in the main locker room for all their players during the regular season. And granted, a lot of times that's affected by a number of guys on injured reserve and all that. And there are a lot more guys on practice squads now than there used to be. But they've got players in an auxiliary locker room. And that was one thing that I noticed and wondered about, because I'd never seen that before. Now, in all honesty, I haven't covered a lot of teams. But so like I said, so a certain amount of that did surprise me in terms of some of the things about, especially that some of the players feel that the weight room area is unsafe, and there's floorboards coming up, stuff like that. When you hear about players being charged, if they want a dinner, then they'll box up dinner, but then they take it out of their paychecks. And I'm thinking, wow. It's just you want guy. You always hear the term, Johnny, as first one in the door, last one out. Well,
yeah.
So if you're spending extra time at the facility and you're there till 7, I don't know, if you're there till 7 o'clock, whatever, 7:30, whatever time it is, it'd be nice to get a meal, especially if you're single and you don't have, anyone to cook for you. But to take it out of a player's check, that was a little shocking to me. But mainly it was just a comparison to all the other teams, and I included that in the story today. It wasn't just talking about the Cardinals, but it was talking about a team like the Vikings, who are number one and basically had all A's. Everything was either an A-, an A, or an A+. And they built a new facility within the last 5 to 10 years, I think it was, and spent over $90 million on it. But the players just love it. And I know there's, some people always react, oh, these are complaining players, and all this stuff. But the irony to me, Johnny, is that how much do we hear about, well, they got to change the culture. Oh, you got to change the culture. We heard that so much about this team. And when some people think of culture, they think, oh, that's the GM, that's this, that's that. All of this is really what the culture is, of how an organization views its players and how they, do things to make it a great place, to come and work. And so it's going to be interesting to see what they do about it, because Michael Bidwell did have some comments. He talked about when Jonathan Gannon was introduced as the head coach, he talked about, things that they talked about things that we can do better. On his interview on 98.7 during their Newsmakers Week, he talked about, we have to look closely at the sports science and a lot of those things and see how we can improve there, because all that's tremendously important. I see these teams hiring like 7 and 8 guys on their staffs for sports science and sports nutrition and this and that and all these different areas, which are so important. And especially when you have a lot of young guys, you don't want them leaving the facility and going to McDonald's for dinner. You want them eating right, and you want them trained and counseled on how to eat right and all those things. And I know in the cafeteria there, they do have a big board that talks about, this has this many calories, this has this, and this has that. But
every elementary school in America has that these days.
Well, that's true. That's a good point. That's a good point. And so, these are the things that are very, very important to players and to teams. And even though some will think, well, how much does that really have to do with being successful? And I know some people pointed out, like the Chiefs, for example, were pretty low, in a bunch of things. Apparently they have some old facilities and, and things like that. But, there's always outliers. You can't just look at one team that maybe is an outlier and say, well, then it's okay if you're horrible. And you have like of 8 categories, the Cardinals had 5 Fs. I mean,
they had the most Fs of anybody.
It's not like they were just average or a little low. They had 5 Fs, and that's just not a good look. And so it's going to be very interesting to see what the organization does to improve it.
I thought they'd probably be middle of the pack, maybe toward the bottom tier. I did not think that they would be by far and away the worst. The Commanders had 4 Fs, the Cardinals had 5. To me, I'm shocked that Michael Bidwell, by doing that, you don't prioritize your players and their nutrition and their bodies. And I always thought he was kind of different from his dad in that sense, because his dad was very stringent on contract extensions. They let people leave and flourish elsewhere. Like, the one thing I would always be able to say about Michael is we got the new stadium built and he pays players, right? Patrick Peterson got an extension and Larry Fitzgerald got extensions and Calais and Darnell, and people got paid. So I'm like, okay, well, certainly he cares about the other stuff, that's below that. We got to make sure we're caring for people and their families. To see that, I mean, I think about Howard, how poor this team is at drafting, and that comes directly from your scouting department. And these scouts, it's not a glamorous job. You're away from your families. When you're at the facility, you're working 12-hour days. These guys are making like 70 grand, right? And so in most organizations, I know for a fact, scouts live off of these free meals. Like, I'm going to just eat all day at the facility. I'm going to take my food home. To imagine, like, looking at your scouts who already are under the gun, they don't make any money, and says, you're going to have to pay for that box lunch that you eat here. I mean, that is absolutely ridiculous. And it makes me feel like, well, by doing so, you're not going to attract the best people. Like, why does Google and IBM and all these Fortune 50 companies attract the best people that come in? Everything's free, right? We have the best health plans. We have the best pension, the 401k. Cardinals, like, this was a point I made last week, Howard, that the internet and fan acumen, it's evolved now. You can't run a clown show like this and expect to just skate under it, pinching pennies. You're going to be exposed. And I applaud the NFLPA for this. I think we need to hold these owners accountable, because there's an owner down the street in Phoenix, in Matt Ishbia, that's turned the heat up on everybody in the Valley. And when you're down there and you're Michael Bidwell and you're hosting Super Bowls and everything's great, but then suddenly a week later, you're being compared to Daniel Snyder in Washington, it's not a place you want to be. So I do think that it will force the issue. I don't think, I saw some people say Bidwell needs to make a statement. What can he even say at this point? You have to speak with actions, not words. You've got to take steps immediately. And again, like I was speaking with somebody last week, and they told me, like, Gannon's a nutrition freak, and that will change. And they will put pressure on Bidwell to revamp everything as it relates to player care and taking care of their bodies. And, when I remember when Michael took over and Ken Wisenhunt became the head coach, they leveled up in a lot of ways. But now that time has come again. Like, what you did in 2006, 2007, 2008, now you need to upgrade from that, right? Now, it can't just be good enough that you got a new stadium built, and you've won, more than you did back in, your Sun Devil days and back in St. Louis in the 80s. Like, okay, now you need to take another step. You can't just be happy with the status quo, because this, Howard, like, everybody gets an equal check from the NFL. So it's the only league really where you don't have to be successful to be in the green every year. And so I think a lot of these owners of the past would just sit back and collect their check. And so it's good to put pressure on ownership, especially a team that, has the longest professional drought in all of pro sports. So, I don't think we'll hear from Michael Bidwell again. I think it's rightfully so. It's going to be Monty out in front and Gannon out in front. Have them do everything moving forward, because they're the clean slate I think the fan base wants. Whether or not they'll succeed, we'll see. But they have the mantra of, don't worry about last season. Don't worry about all this stuff. We're new. We come from winning cultures. We'll take care of everything.
No, I think you make it a tremendous amount of points. And, one of the teams that was in the top group was Miami. And I didn't realize, I had forgotten that they had opened a new facility, training facility 2 years ago. There was $115 million. And I saw some defending the Cardinals because maybe 6 or 7 years ago, they spent like $15 million or something, upgrading what they had. Here's $115 million. And I read that they have a 2-story weight room. And I mean, it's just like, it's all state of the art stuff. And that's what you have to do to compete. And players talk to each other. Now, granted, offering money certainly is a big part of it in terms of contracts, but you also want to be at a place that cares about you. And the other part, we talked about nutrition. Here's a team. Now let's be real about it. A big factor in what happened to this team over the last year and a half was just an incredible number of injuries. Now, were they flukes? Was it luck? What was it? Well, that's something they should be looking at really long and hard. Of why were there so many injuries? Why were they just constant? And they weren't just all issue stuff. Last year in 2021 there seemed to be an epidemic of ribs injuries. This year it was back injuries. I mean, there's a whole bunch of guys that suffered back injuries. So what is, I don't know the answer. They need to find it out, because, we can say all you want about having the good players or not, but if those good players aren't on the field, it doesn't do you any good. I mean, Jonathan Gannon just came with a team that was as healthy as any team that I've seen in the last 5 years in the NFL, with not having guys miss games, and an offensive line that only missed 3 starts total, 3 starts the entire season. And that's a big part of your success when your best players are on the field. The Cardinals obviously haven't had that for the last year and a half, and they need to be looking at that, like I said, very long and hard to try to figure out if there's a pattern and why.
Old players get hurt too, and they've been too predicated on old players. Yeah, and they're going to get some young talent in the upcoming NFL draft, and we're bracing for a free agency that's going to see some house cleaning. But in the meantime, check out Howard's work at gophnx.com. Slam the promo code Howard, HOWARD. Become a diehard. Come yell and scream at us in the exclusive member Discord. We're hanging out there on a daily basis. 20% off all future PHNX events. Cop a free hat and or shirt for every year you're signed up for the diehard subscription membership. Again, like this video, share it around the YouTube metaverse. We greatly appreciate it. We are closing in, I think, 11,000 subscribers here on YouTube, which is fantastic. It's fantastic, Howard, having you on. We're going to run it back tomorrow. And my friend, maybe we get some more info on this Hopkins deal, because it really does feel like we're touch and go, closing in on something happening, especially as you mentioned with that guaranteed money coming up.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, and that's a big thing. I mean, it's not he doesn't have the guarantees, but it is a big cap hit, and you can live with it maybe for a short period of time, but you definitely want it settled, because if for some reason you can't trade him, well, then they probably have to, maybe do something with the contract, because I don't know what he would do, because, all indications are he'd like a new start, but he wants some kind of new contract with some guaranteed money, and, we'll see if he's able to get it. But, we're right around the corner. It seems that it never ends in the NFL. It seems like just yesterday that they played the Super Bowl, and here we are already done the combine and free agency. A week from today, next Monday, is when and we know that some of the negotiations go on before that anyway, but that's when it can legally begin at noon Eastern. So I got to get this time right, because the clocks change around the country, but not here. So that'll be 9 Pacific next Monday is when negotiations can begin with free agents from other teams. And then the new league year begins on Wednesday, when every team has to be compliant with the salary cap. So, we know that, what are we calling them now? Chosen Anderson? I don't know what the heck that means, but that'll be 12 million cleared, and there'll probably be some other things also, but it's it'll start getting crazy next week, no doubt about it.
Doesn't feel like we've had any time off, and that's how we like it here. We only off season of PHNX Cardinals. Ding that bell so you get reminded every time we go live. For Howard Balzer, I'm Johnny Venerable. Subscribe to PHNX Cardinals wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you tomorrow.